Hello everybody, my name is Cayetana Martinez and I'm a UQ Ventures Programs Designer. In this video, the third of a series, we are going to focus on Scrum. In the previous two videos, we have talked about Agile methodologies and I gave you a little bit of background and also compare Agile project management with traditional project management. If you want to check out these videos, they should be on UQ Ventures YouTube channel. On this video, we're going to focus on an agile methodology called SCRUM that has become really useful these days, not just for programming, but also and specifically for team organization and project management. Let's dig into it. So as we discussed in our previous two videos, Agile is not a new thing, and maybe you're already using some methodologies or tools that you could define as Agile. I have put some of them here today, and this is my own classification. There are different ways to classify them, but I just want to give you a rundown very quickly so you know that maybe this Agile concept is not as new for you as you thought it is. Agile has been used in programming for a long time, I would say since the 80s, although the Agile Manifesto was designed and written down in the early 2000s. But Agile for programming and later project management has been around for a while. Some of the tools and methodologies are Scrum, Kanban, SAFe. SAFe is an organizational version of Scrum for large organizations, and XP, or also called extreme programming. But Agile is also used for small and medium enterprises. It's used by entrepreneurs and startups and business in general. And one book called Lean Startup by Eric Rice kind of summarizes this process and applies Agile to the startups world and startup needs. Really good read in case you haven't read it yet. And the last one that I'm sure most of you are familiar with or at least have heard of is what we call design thinking. And design thinking is a human-centered methodology, same as most of Agile methodologies, and has been around for a while, particularly useful for product development and design. So I'm sure you're familiar with some of these, and maybe moving on, you know that you're already working with Agile, even if you weren't giving these tools that name. So let's focus today on Scrum. On the methodology called Scrum. I am a Scrum Master. I got certified in 2013 and I've been using Scrum Master for a while now. Bear with me because Scrum is kind of a technical methodology, so there were a few things we need to go through and it can get a little bit technical at times. I hope you can always go back and read and stop the recording if you need to. This is what we will cover here today. We'll go through roles, events, and artifacts in Scrum. We will present the Scrum framework or Scrum lifecycle. We talked about epic stories and tasks and what do they mean and how you can apply them to your own projects even if you don't use the whole Scrum framework. We'll go through Scrum boards, and to end up this presentation I'll quickly go through what I consider the pros and cons of using Scrum to manage projects and some companies and products that have used Scrum. For the purpose of this presentation, I will focus on Scrum as a project management tool, and I won't get that much into how Scrum has been used in software development and programming. In this slide, I'm providing a little bit more of background on how Scrum came to be, and also an interesting story of what a Scrum actually means. A lot of people think that a Scrum is an acronym, but it's not. It refers to this figure or this position in rugby football where all the teams kind of interlock with their heads down in an attempt to gain possession of the ball. So that's the figure or the picture you had in the slide prior to this one, and I guess what it tries to represent is that idea that the team tackles a project together and that nobody is more important than anybody else. So you need the whole team to be aligned with the objectives, to be on the same page to kind of conquer that ball, right? And I think once you understand where that's coming from, and in my case I know anything about rugby, so it was a whole revelation, it's a really powerful metaphor for how Scrum works and the importance of team collaboration. I remember when I started working with Scrum, someone told me, "Hey, Scrum, what's the deal with all those sprints?" And I think it's because whenever you talk about Scrum and you know a little bit about it, the word sprint comes to mind, even if people don't really know what to do with it or what that really means. And what I would say is the sprints of the skeleton of the Scrum life cycle. Usually we organize work around sprints. Sprints are 2 weeks of intense work where features of the project get developed. Usually, the sprints keep repeating until the project is complete. So sometimes you can determine beforehand how many sprints you can have. Most usually than not, you won't be able to, especially if the customer, as is desirable, is highly involved in the process as well. In each sprint, though, you will develop, test, and integrate and approve whatever requirements were established for that sprint, and then the process will continue and you will move on to the next sprint. Scrum has different elements. We have three roles of people, different events that we call meetings, and artifacts. So in this presentation here today, we'll cover those three: the roles, the events, and the artifacts that determine the Scrum life cycle. Something that we already discussed about Scrum or about Agile methodologies in general is the ability to break down big projects into small tasks that can be actioned by a group of people, right? And in Scrum, this takes like three shapes. But usually when we get the assessment or the assignment, from a client or a big project, we call that epic. At epic is like the biggest chunk or the biggest project that you get in your hands as a team. Then your role as a team, and with the help of the other two roles in the team, the Scrum Master and the Product Owner, is to break the epic down into stories, right? Something more actionable, and that usually will be what determines each sprint, and then each story gets further broken down into tasks, small chunks of work that can be completed in one go. I would recommend that whatever you do, even if you decide to not talk about a Scrum ever again, to keep this type of strategy in mind, because it is quite useful whenever you have to deal with a project, with a group assessment, with whatever task you get given that is quite chunky and quite big, to break it down, follow this structure. It's kind of a funnel shape from something big to something that can be actioned and solved or designed in one go. And that's actually quite good for team motivation as well, because you see that things get done and that the project keeps moving along. Here I have brought an image on how that could be broken down in a specific project given by a customer. The epic would be kind of the major assignment given to you by the customer. In this case, as a customer, I want to be able to have a wish list so that I can come back to buy products later, being the product or the context that we are talking about, a website, right, or a checkout website. Then you break down that epic into two stories. As a customer, I want to be able to save a product in my wish list so that I can view later again. And the second story would be, as a customer, I want to be able to view my wish list. So there are two different actions, right? One is to save the product in the wish list, and the other one is to see the wish list, to see what's in there and what I can buy from it. Then you see that further down, you break that into 4 tasks. Put an add to wish list button, create new DB to store the wishlist item, create a page to display users' wishlist, and add view wishlist link to homepage. So you can see how you keep breaking it down into further smaller tasks until you get to something that is very tangible and that can be actioned straight away. So some of my favorite things about a Scrum, or one of my favorite things about a Scrum, is the way teams work together and the diversity within teams as well. So when we talk about a Scrum, we talk about 3 roles that are part of the team. Keep in mind that sometimes the role doesn't mean there's just one person. Sometimes one role can be taken by more than one person at the same time, or kind of team tagging. In the team, there are 2 key roles and one bigger role, one member role. We have the product owner, that is the staff member that represents the what and the why that the customer desires. This person, and even if he's part of your team, it tries to represent and to hold what the customer wants and what the customer had assigned to the team to do. Then you have the Scrum Master. That's the role I was accredited in 2014, I think it was. And what it does is the facilitator. It is the one that is more knowledgeable about the methodology and the one that keeps direct contact to the product owner, that is the kind of the client persona, and the Scrum team or the Scrum development team. And the Scrum team is basically all the developers, the designer, and everybody you need to have in the team to actually design that product. So the people with the technical capabilities as well. So as you can see here in this graphic, direct communication is encouraged all around, right? The product owner with the team with one another, the team with the Scrum Master with the product owner. But the Scrum Master has a very interesting role and a very caring role as well, and a very protective role with the team. Usually when you work or when you implement a Scrum in your company, the team you work with are highly skilled people, like IT, designers, programmers, etc., engineers, and they usually are highly required as well, right? They are in high demand within the company. So one of the roles of the Scrum Master, whenever you are within a Scrum focusing on delivering specific tasks and user stories, is to make sure that the team doesn't get disturbed by anybody else, not by the external people, stakeholders, nor by other team members that may require their assistance from this development team, which is incredibly hard and sometimes very frustrating for people that are not aware of Scrum. And one of the main barriers about introducing Scrum in a company that is not fully agile, because some people don't understand why you cannot drop whatever you're doing and help them for 5 minutes. But for Scrum to work and for the sprints to actually be delivered in whatever time frame you plan to deliver them in, the team has to be 100% focused on the task at hand. So one of the roles of the Scrum Masters is to make sure that you become kind of the shield of your team, and whatever gets required is being asked to you directly, and then you can facilitate a discussion later on, ideally after the sprint, with your team to see how you can accommodate that request. But as much as you can, you have to protect your team and making sure they don't get pulled aside or distracted from the task on hand. So these are the 3 main roles: product owner, Scrum Master, and Scrum development team. In this slide, we are going to talk about how Scrum works with the life cycle of Scrum. As we talked in the previous slide, there are 3 main roles, and in this slide, we're going to focus especially on the 5 key Scrum events that are usually meetings. The main event that happens in Scrum, and is kind of the skeleton of the Scrum, as we already discussed, is the sprint. This is 2-week period where all the features get developed, tested, and finalized. But for the sprint to kick off, you first need a previous meeting called sprint planning, where the team decided what user stories are going to be developed in the sprint. During the sprint, every day of the sprint, we have a daily Scrum meeting. Scrum meetings are usually 15 minutes long, and every person in the team has to address 3 things. What did you do yesterday? What are you going to do today? And if there are any roadblocks. In those meetings are specifically important for the team transparency and accountability, and also to make visible if there are any issues, long-term issues or short-term issues. It also develops collaboration and rapport and trust in the team. That's also one principle that we saw when talking about Toyota Lean Manufacturing System. After the sprint is over, we have a sprint review where basically again we go through what happened, what were the problems, what things worked and what didn't. And then we have a sprint retrospective where we make sure that all the key learnings are saved and the team knows how to move into the next sprint. There are many other elements or definitions of done or interesting thing about a Scrum that we can go into, but I want to keep this pretty superficial and kind of big picture. I don't want to get too technical or lost in the details, but I think things that you can walk in even if you don't use a Scrum are how to split up a project into epics and user stories, how to have a planning meeting to make sure that you know exactly what everybody in the team is going to do for those 2 weeks, how to keep meetings short and to the point using daily scrums, and how to bring the team together in a debrief and reflective manner using sprint retrospective. So that would be for me the key takeaways of how Scrum works or the Scrum lifecycle. Lastly, I would like to talk about the Scrum 3 artifacts or tangible. Probably by this stage, you are now thinking on how all this process takes place and how you visualize it. You can visualize it in a Scrum board. This is usually the preferred method of action and the preferred platform to see how the team is tracking and how the user stories are tracking. And it takes shape in a similar board as a Kanban board. It has a little bit more rigidity to it, but as you can see, you still have the user stories on one side and then 3 main columns that show whether the task has to be done, if it's in progress, or it has been completed. And then you can color code it in different ways. In this case, they've been color coded based on the story, like each story got a different color, and then you have little dots that signify who in the team is working on them. If you want to look into this a little bit further, there are interesting articles that talk about how Scrum boards can be used and also the differences between Kanban boards and Scrum boards in case you are into this type of project management. So hopefully by now you have a better idea of what is a Scrum and the different stages involved in the Scrum process. And I would like to stop now a little bit and talk about the difference of the pros and cons in Scrum, right? There's thousands of blog posts and articles and dark corners of the internet where people discuss day and night whether Scrum is better than other methodologies in Agile. But I would like to compare Scrum with what we call traditional project management or waterfall approach, right? So in terms of pros, let's go first with reasons why Scrum is really good. It definitely creates accountability, transparency, and trust within the team, as we already seen. It creates clear definitions of results, mainly because the people involved have a lot of agency and decision-making power in terms of defining what means done and what means in progress. So because people are more because people in the team own the decision and own the definitions, the results are very clearer. As we said before, and as I keep repeating throughout the presentation, Scrum and Agile in general are particularly good for changing environments and for innovating the environments and innovative industries. So it definitely accommodates innovation and change much better than waterfall approach. It also allows for gathering better metrics and making sure that the data is well collected from the beginning of the project. And this is connected with the idea of that the results are much more clear from the beginning. And because it's agile and it's a process that is circular and every single feature gets tested with customers before being released or included in the final product, it's much more cost and time effective. In terms of cons or projects where Scrum maybe is not the best tool, something that I've noticed and I've been kind of witnessing this firsthand is that a Scrum can lead to scope creep, right? The end date needs to be very well defined because what it tends to happen, especially when you have high inputs from the customer, but also when innovation is welcome and celebrated and changes are welcomed as well, is that the scope creep can be a little bit large. That means that the scope keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's hard to bring the project to an end because changes are made all the time or because more features keep being added. So it's very important to keep that in mind and making sure that especially as the Scrum Master and the product owner makes sometimes very clear that the project needs to be end and to be released at a specific date. So sometimes even features that would be great to have, you have to take in mind the larger good or the greater good of the project being done versus more AI features to be added to avoid a scope creep and to make sure that the project is actually finalized. I found also that it's harder to manage in large teams, mostly because it's not a methodology a lot of people are familiar with. So you really need for it to work that everybody's on board and everybody in the team is committed with this methodology and believes in this methodology and believes that the process is highly regimented and that they have to follow it, right? So the larger the team is, the harder it gets to bring everybody on the same page. It is also hard to work on a Scrum if you are the only team within an organization that is using Scrum. And that usually tends to be the case in a large company. For example, if they want to become agile, they don't usually train everybody at the same time, right? They train a specific unit or a specific team to be agile and they train them in a methodology, while the rest of the organization is not agile. Which creates a lot of tension between people in the agile team versus people that are outside the team and puts a lot of tension and stress on the Scrum Master as the protector of the agile team as well. So something that I would say it's interesting as well with this process is, as we spoke before, Agile puts a lot of emphasis in the people and the talent, right? Making sure that you take care of your people and your talent and you protect them, and that also that they feel valued and respected, because Agile works with teams that are self-organized and have high independence. So if you are working in the context of a company or an industry where this kind of trust and self-organization is not promoted or welcomed, Agile won't work. Even if they say they want to be Agile, if they have a big issue leaving people to work on their own path or on a more self-organizing manner, Agile, unfortunately, it's very hard to make it work. So I would say those are the main cons. And I would like to move now to the next point where I will talk about some products and projects and companies that have used Scrum. So very quickly here you can see some of the companies that used Scrum. As you can see, Adobe uses pretty much Scrum in all their products. I found interesting that the BBC iPlayer was developed using Scrum, and all other examples here have been using Scrum as well. There are many other companies, of course. I just put here some of the ones that are maybe products or services that you use, so you feel more familiar with them. And very interesting, and you can see that on the notes of this video, there is a great white paper on Salesforce and its transformation into Agile at in the early 2000s. So I would definitely recommend you to check that out. Well, I hope you enjoyed the presentation on Scrum roles, artifacts, and events, and on the Scrum lifecycle in general. Just as a slide to summarize the Scrum 5 principles: courage, focus, commitment, respect, and openness. As you can see, those are pretty much the key elements for innovation as well. So it makes sense that Scrum, same as other Agile methodologies, are so connected with innovation and creativity, because in its own implementation and in its own process, at the root of it has innovative principles. So even if you decide that the Scrum is not for you, or you don't have the time or the tools to implement it, I will invite you to maybe use one of the tools that we have seen as part of Scrum, maybe the daily Scrum meeting or the Scrum board or a version of it, so you start feeling or getting a taste of what working in a more agile manner means. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and if you haven't watched video 1 and video 2 on what is agile and very basic principles on agile project management, I will encourage you to go on the YouTube Virtuous channel and take a look. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for watching these videos. Bye.